Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Tonight, it's the debate for the Democratic primary in the 33rd State Senatorial District, a district that includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Allerton, Bedford Park, Belmont, Bronxdale, Fieldston, Norwood, Olinville, Pelham Parkway, Riverdale, Van Nest, and portions of Morris Park, Tremont, and Fordham, a very large district indeed. Tonight's program is presented in partnership with the League of Women Voters of New York City, a nonpartisan political organization that advocates for informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues. Co-sponsors tonight are the Bronx Times, City and State New York, City Limits, the Norwood News, The City, and WNYC. The primary for State Senate and Congress is on Tuesday, August 23rd. The early voting period is from August 13th to 21st. The deadline to request your absentee ballot in person is August 22nd. The deadline to return absentee ballots is August 23rd. The deadline for the Board of Elections to receive absentee ballots is August 30th. They must be postmarked by primary day, the 23rd. For more information, please visit vote.nyc. Now let's meet the candidates. The senator from the 33rd Senatorial District is Gustavo Rivera. Nice to have you with us, sir. He is the chair of the Senate's Health Committee as well. Miguelina Camillo is an attorney. Nice to have you with us. She's the president of the Bronx Women's Bar Association and the Bronx chapter of 100 Hispanic Women, and the former associate counsel for NYC's Board of Elections. Nice to have you both with us. Candidates in tonight's debate, I will direct a question to one candidate. That candidate will have 90 seconds to respond, and then the other candidate will each get 90 seconds to respond to the question before we proceed to the next question. You will receive 30 and 15-second verbal time warnings, and the moderator, that's me, reserves the right to ask follow-up questions and also to allow for rebuttals and dialogue as time allows. After the initial answers, no statement can be longer than 30. Please note there will be no opening statements, but at the end of the program, each candidate will have a 1-minute closing comment to offer. One final note before we begin: the questions on tonight's program include those submitted by the candidates themselves. Candidates, nice to have you with us. By prior agreement, the first question goes to you, Ms. Camillo. Let's talk about the word progressive and what it means in the context of this campaign. Webster defines progressive as making use of or interested in new ideas, findings, or opportunities. But politically, in this fraught day and age, the notion has split the Democratic Party nationally and locally. So what does progressive mean to you? Are you progressive? And how would that answer to that question translate into action if you are elected to the 33rd Senatorial District, to be the senator in the 33rd District?
Yes, thank you, Gary, for that question. It's a great start because we are both seeking to be the Democratic nominees for the seat. And the term of progressive has borne out of the Democratic Party, I believe, to more identify those that are in the left and have become somewhat polarized on certain issues, and it's gotten a negative connotation, which I think the focus really needs to be the political philosophy of inclusion. Being democratic, I would call myself pragmatic, and that's rooted really in who I am. I've never forgotten where I've come from, and I've always been a person of action. So to me, being progressive, I say, yes, I'm progressive, but I am pragmatic more than anything because it's just been my career path. It's been the way that I've worked in the community. And while I want to make sure that we have equality, that we have those democratic values, that we are rising together, my approach is to be pragmatic and thoughtful about it.
Thank you very much. Senator, your thoughts about the word progressive?
Certainly do. It is true that in the last couple of years, it has become quite a charged word. And as most politically charged words, sometimes it kind of lose its meaning. But for me, you could even call me liberal if you'd like. I believe that the state has a responsibility, as in government has a responsibility to folks who are most vulnerable. I think that we have an opportunity in government to make sure that we can make people's lives better, that we can be proactive in that way. And I think that that is what progressive is meant to elicit. Someone who believes that government can act aggressively to secure universal health care, to protect people's rights to be in their homes, to make sure that the wealthy pay their fair share. All of these things, I think, fall in line with what has been understood as progressive. Certainly, the work that I've done goes along those lines. So I do not mind being called that, but there's that other word, the liberal word. I actually don't mind that one either.
Senator, one candidate here has never served in elected office before. The other has served, but not in all the neighborhoods that are now in the district. Plain and simple, which of the two of you knows the 33rd Senatorial District better? The people, the neighborhoods, the needs, the vulnerabilities, and the broad social economic diversity of the people in the different neighborhoods.
Well, the newly drawn 33rd Senatorial District, and I've represented the 33rd for 11 years, the newly drawn 33rd has about 50% of the district that I currently represent, including my district office, which has always been in the same place, 187th in the Grand Concourse. It also includes neighborhoods that I represented very briefly back when I was elected in 2010, namely Norwood, Tracy Towers, Scott Tower. It is true that about 30% of it, mostly in Riverdale, Spuyten Duyvil, North Riverdale, et cetera, are neighborhoods that I've never represented before, but certainly a chunk, about 70% of the district is district that I've represented before. And I certainly believe that while I'm getting to know most of the issues that are happening up in the hills, so to speak, in Riverdale, I believe that as I've been speaking to constituents that the issues are not that different. Certainly the demographics are going to shift a little bit, but when we're talking about people wanting access to universal health care, people wanting to make sure that the rich pay their fair share, having access to affordable housing, all these are things that impact the entire district, the newly drawn 33rd, as well as the one that I've represented for the last 11 years.
Thank you very much. Ms. Camillo?
So I would just respond in that, first to say that this newly drawn district, we've heard some numbers from the senator. When you look at the maps, his old district is about 30% in the new district is what I would say is my calculation. And as far as knowing the issues of the district, we've been campaigning, and I've been campaigning since February 2022, and working in the district as an attorney throughout the Bronx. I'm very familiar with those kitchen table issues that everyone has. It's not about the lines, it's really about the people and the ability to connect with people. And I've shown that in my record as an attorney, as a community leader. I could bring people together, and that really, I think, is what it takes to represent this district well, because neither of us will know every single issue. Neither of us will know how to exactly deal with everything, but who's going to bring people together to deal with the issue at hand is what the voters really need to hone in on when they make their decision about a candidate.
Thank you. Let's just start talking about some kitchen table issues, as Ms. Camillo referred to them. I guess we're up to you, Senator, right? Senator, in the bio on your official website, it says your goal is to shape policies that will help tear down some of the institutional barriers that stand in the way of Bronxites having a healthier lifestyle. So a two-part question. You were appointed to chair of the Health Committee in 2018. A recent Daily News article criticized you for not being able to get drugs that enhance opioid addiction classified as controlled substances. And then the larger question, why isn't the New York Health Act passed already?
In a minute and a half, I'll do my best. First of all, with the second one. The New York Health Act is my #1 legislative priority. The goal here is to, starting from the viewpoint that healthcare is a human right, we need to make sure that we can secure that for everybody, so that regardless of your age, your wealth, your immigration status, if you're human, you should have healthcare, period. And the New York Health Act will make sure that that happens. It is a difficult thing. We're trying to do something that would fundamentally change the way that we deliver healthcare. And there's entrenched interest, there's mentality about how healthcare is supposed to work that are very difficult things to do. And remember, this has not been done anywhere in the country. So we are trying to break a barrier here. That is, the resistance is about how to change something so fundamental. It's very, very difficult to do. On the other story, I think it was a cheap shot, the story that you're referring to, because ultimately, if you look at that particular drug, which is a drug that is actually available for a lot of other purposes, there was the bill that was introduced was back in 2020. I dropped it. The Assembly never reintroduced it, and in the last couple of years, nobody has come to us to say this is a bill that you need to be reintroduced. That the bottom line is that we're going to deal with opioid crisis or addiction. We need to make sure we move away from criminalization, which is what I've been doing and I will continue to do.
Let me just follow up about the Health Act, because it's obviously been on everyone's mind, and we'll give you, Ms. Camillo, a chance to talk about it as well. Why should voters say, well, you know what, he's been in office, he's been the chair of the Health Committee for a few years now, and it hasn't happened? Will you be able to get it done now, and why hasn't it gotten done? I mean, you acknowledge that it's very difficult. Yes, a lot of things are difficult, but this is just so important. What are your thoughts?
I'll remind you about many consequential things that took many years to get done in the Senate. Whether we're talking about marriage equality, that bill took over 10 years after its introduction to be able to pass. The bill that actually codified Roe v. Wade, which we finally passed after we got rid of the IDC, by the way, we passed it, and it was actually something that had been introduced by the current leader of the majority when she was originally a senator when I worked for her back in 2003. So everything consequential takes time to be able to do. And I would say that I believe that we are building momentum, and I want to continue to build that momentum because it is that important. Healthcare is a human right, and we need to get it done.
Ms. Camilo?
Well, I certainly agree that healthcare is one of the top issues throughout the district, throughout New York State, and we must do everything possible. As someone that has grown up without healthcare, there's so many Bronxites that are going without, necessary healthcare, and looking at the trajectory of the New York Health Act, that it's been sitting, hasn't been presented out of committee for a vote. People will question that. People will question, I definitely, as a first-time candidate, I'm coming in with a fresh perspective. I'm coming in with new ideas, new energy of how to move things that are important. So I will come in full force, wanting to move forward that type of legislation and figuring out, putting in the work that if what's being held back is the single taxpayer system, which there has been a commission and a study looking into what that may mean to the tax base, what issues that will bring about, then that being my single act, if it were my single piece of legislation, then my 100% commitment has to be to that piece of legislation, moving it forward, and not forgetting about the needs of the district. The district also, it can't just be the legislation we're trying to pass in Albany. What are the needs of our district as far as healthcare, and what type of resources are we giving them when we're still living through COVID?
Let me just follow up, and maybe, Senator, you would want to follow up. You both
Sure.
can follow up as well. If the bill is taken out of committee and gets defeated, is that worse than waiting for a while until you know that you have the votes and then you can get it passed? Because you talked about wanting
Sure.
to, it hasn't been put out of committee.
Sure, it could be that is possible, that is a consequence that maybe that's part of the thinking of not moving it forward. But regardless of whether you're moving it forward and you have these co-sponsors and this support, you have people against the bill as well that are contributing, to the idea of maybe holding that bill. So I think you have to look at everything, and I don't have a full understanding, not being the health chair myself. I just know that this is something that is important to everyone in the district, and that we should be clear about why it's not moving forward.
Senator, did you want to add something to that?
Absolutely. First of all,
And then, by the way, if either of you want to weigh in on something, just raise your hand and make sure
Absolutely.
we don't move on
Thank
without it. Go ahead.
so this is, I would have to say that unfortunately it speaks, unfortunately, to Ms. Camilo's not understanding exactly how the legislative process works. In this particular instance, it is a bill that would have to move out of my committee, then go through the Finance Committee, ultimately go to the floor. And as we've done in the last couple of years in our majority, which again was a product of us defeating the IDC, we managed to get things done by forming a consensus within the conference, and we have been building that consensus. We've moved big bills doing that, and I'm working, there's actually a committee that has been appointed by the leader to do just that, and so that is the process that it's ongoing. Something so consequential does not happen overnight or by itself.
Did you want to add anything else? Or
I
we're
just
good?
want to briefly respond that although I don't have elected office experience, I have experience in representation, and representing the interests of everyone in the district is what I would do if I were the elected.
My producers have informed me that I made an error, and Ms. Camillo is supposed to get the next question. So we'll give you two in a row, but everybody's getting equal amount of time. Let's talk about fighting crime, starting with the
Yes.
crime budget. Does it make sense to reapportion funds marked for crime and corrections and use it for targeted programs that keep kids off the streets and job training and development programs that would help adults fight poverty?
I am very passionate about working with our youth, and I fully believe that resources have to be allocated to those programs, and we have to create more opportunities for mentorship, for our youth to see people that look like us in positions of power so that they can be committed to their own self-development and either go towards higher education or to seek the path of employment. And we're speaking today, in the last 24 hours, there were 2 shootings in Fordham Plaza. There's the loss of a 14-year-old. These are things that are happening daily basis. And it is a tragedy on both sides because we have young perpetrators and young victims. So absolutely, we have to dedicate resources. I have experience in working with youth programming as a former mentor to Bronx Connect, who worked in the court system and was helping divert youth out of jails and setting them on a path where they could have a second chance, essentially. So I'm fully committed to creating more programs like that.
Being committed to the programs, of course, is one thing. They need to be paid for.
Yes.
A question, and I think the question that I asked was whether, from a budgetary standpoint, to look at budgets where there is money, potentially use crime budgets or use corrections budgets to fulfill some of these objectives, so that there's less crime, and then, of course, presumably maybe less need for those kinds of services.
Well, I want to, yes, I'll answer. Allocating funds to the program is important, but if we're speaking about taking funding away from personnel and cutting amounts of money in personnel, which is also needed, I think we have to be careful and have a balanced approach, because while we have law enforcement and the talk has been about defunding or taking away funds from that necessary, also piece of it, because you have to work with law enforcement and you have to work with community leaders. So I would tread lightly in how we figure that out, but that would be my job as an elected.
Thank you. Senator?
The most important thing that we can do as it regards to crime is stop it before it happens. When we're talking about policing, police is absolutely necessary, and we need to make sure that that police focus on policing, which is about solving crimes, finding people, finding the folks who commit crimes and holding them accountable as part of the system. And I certainly, my heart goes out to those families that lost loved ones in the last hours or so. The goal here has to be to achieve public safety, and to do that, we need to invest in things that give us stability over the long term. This is why I fought to make sure that we kept the Campaign for Fiscal Equity finally paying back some of the education funding that we need in schools in the district. This is why I've committed hundreds of thousands of dollars to violence interrupter programs like BRAG over the years, which go proactively to stop gun violence before it happens and to react when there is a shooting, to actually stop any retaliation. This is why I've worked with schools all over the district on basic issues of civic participation, to make sure that young kids understand how government actually functions. All of these things require funding, and I do believe that we need to put money in that, because those are the things that give us stability and public safety over a longer period of time.
Thank you. Let's stay with you, Ms. Camillo, for it's really a part two of the same question, but let's talk about bail reform. The mayor and others have said enough is enough on bail reform. After overhauling the cash bail system, the legislature went back to the drawing board and expanded the list of bail-eligible crimes and gave judges more discretion on setting bail for repeat offenders. How much does bail reform contribute to the rise in crime, and does the legislature need to do even more to reform the bail reform?
Well, I'll tell you, Gary, this is the #1 topic. When we're meeting voters and neighbors in the street, people are concerned, and bail reform has become that term that they associate to the increased crime and what we're seeing on a daily basis.
It's been a flashpoint, there's no question about it.
Absolutely. And, my background, my experience in working in the court system, working as a criminal defense attorney, I understand that bail is to ensure someone's return to court. And we have to protect a person's constitutional right to have their day in court. But with that said, we have always relied on judicial discretion to be able to sit from a place and act and be able to assess, many factors, ones that the public cannot do. And just so you know, when you are arrested and detained and taken to the court system, there's about 24 hours turnaround where you have to decide what is best. And absolutely, it is upon our electeds to try to craft legislation that is tailored to the community's needs. And that's what the legislature did when they went back up on emergency session, when they added to that list and expanded the discretion for judges. So I believe we have to meet the moment and answer to the community and be able to always tailor legislation when needed.
So is bail reform, are the people who complain about bail reform accurate in saying that bail reform is at the root of so many of our problems? And then if you get to go to Albany, would you say, you know what, we've got to take a look at this and do more with it?
I believe it's the easy answer for people that are feeling fearful, people that are feeling, we're coming out of COVID, we haven't recovered yet, and things are happening that are getting greater attention. On a national level, crime is rising. So in New York, really, what we're experiencing, it's an overall effect of the past years that we've had. So I understand the community concern, and I would want to be an elected that speaks for them in Albany and tailoring legislation further if necessary.
Okay, Senator?
Ms. Cabillo's point right at the end, I'll start right there. There are national trends, unfortunately, in crime that are happening everywhere. Whether there has been bail reform or not, those are trends that are very troublesome, but that we have to deal with as a country, as a nation, and certainly as an entire state. And I don't believe currently that the data demonstrates that as it relates to crime spikes in the state of New York, that bail reform is responsible for them. Let's remember why we passed bail reform to begin with. Bail is a way to criminalize poverty. Two names, Harvey Weinstein on one end is somebody who was a predator, and yet because he was a wealthy man, he was able to go stay for an hour in court and be back sleeping in his silk sheets, before the day was done. Khalif Browder is the other one. Khalif was a constituent and a young man who was arrested at 16, kept in Rikers for 3 years, mostly in solitary confinement, ultimately was let out because there was no evidence that he committed anything. And because he couldn't pay bail, he stayed in jail for 3 years and ultimately committed suicide. That is what we want to avoid. And bail reform has helped us to do that. Let's actually figure out the things that really solve crimes, not use this as a boogeyman.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator, let's talk about homelessness and housing. Advocates for homeless people say there are many reasons that the city's shelter system has become overloaded. Those include a lack of affordable housing, an increase in evictions, and longer wait times to move people out of shelters and into apartments. Now, the governors of Texas and Arizona have been sending busloads of migrants to New York, exacerbating the already overloaded homeless population. Now, locally, the attempt to site a facility for men at 262nd Street and Broadway is now the subject of a lawsuit, citing concerns of backroom deals to get the operator the contract. So, here's the question. Do you believe it's every neighborhood's responsibility to find locations for affordable housing and to house the homeless? If so, where in the 33rd Senatorial District do you propose that they be built?
So I believe that certainly there needs to be a balance of services available in all neighborhoods so that we can house our homeless New Yorkers. I will tell you that what I've done in the 33rd District that I've represented for the last 11 years, there's a process which I go through when I'm considering whether I'm going to be supportive of any of these type of facilities. First, I determine what exactly is coming there. We know that sometimes there's all sorts of rumors about what it could be, what it's supposed to be, what it might be. I want to know what it actually is. I want to know who's actually going to run it, and that's an important piece of it. Seeing the organization that is going to run it, what kind of record do they have? What kind of services are they providing in other places? And determining all of that then makes me determine at the end whether I'm going to be supportive of it or not. There's been times when I've been supportive of a certain project, and sometimes when I have not been, whether it's a supportive housing, homeless shelter, drug treatment facility, etc. I take each facility on its own merits, and I make determination about whether I'm going to be supportive of it or not. And that's what I will do in basically every instance going forward.
Do you have a vision of the previous district that you served, or even the new district, of you say, you know what, this would be a good place for a housing project, or if we build it here, this would be a good spot for affordable housing?
Nothing jumps to mind immediately. I mean, it's a large district that I already represent, and a larger one that I will represent if I win re-election. But I think that the thing that we have to focus on as far as homelessness, keeping people in their homes is number one priority, which is something that my office has done for 11 years, second to none. We keep people in their homes first to make sure that that they're not at risk of being homeless.
Ms. Camillo?
The homelessness issue is really a combination of a housing crisis, a mental health crisis. We have great concern for these individuals that are being warehoused in certain situations without those supportive services, the wraparound services. And it really takes community involvement to address these issues, like the shelter that you spoke of in North Riverdale, which I'm very familiar with. The question there really is who's going to administer this shelter, and are they doing everything by the book? The contract is still not public. They're telling the local businesses to leave because they've already have these plans plans drawn up that no one has seen, except to know that they want to house 8 men per room. And that is highly troubling when you also know that the area lacks transportation access, and it is a concern for the community, but it takes community involvement. It takes support from the local electeds and the community boards to come together, because that really is, when I'm speaking to neighbors about the issues, it's really a concern of them not knowing what's going on. Similar to what Senator Ramirez said, he has to dig and find out information, which is the job of the elected, to make sure that we know as much as possible. And I don't have a set location, but I know that factors would be necessarily reviewed, but with community involvement and with the partnership of the local electeds.
Thank you very much. I guess we're back to you, Ms. Camillo. I guess we start with a budget question. It's always about money, right? In the spring, when the state budget passed, there was enthusiasm for the $31.5 billion allocated for school aid and $400 million for CUNY and SUNY. But because of a shrinking public school population, the city council, cut the city's education budget, and now the courts, as I understand the latest news, is it's gone back and forth. They're playing ping pong with it. So what is your vision of the schools in the 33rd Senatorial District? And in the next session, what would you hope to accomplish to address any number of education issues? So education's on the table. There's funding. There's all kinds of things. You can address it, and then we'll let the senator do the same.
Sure. I know firsthand the value of education, and I think it's important to always share your personal story when you're connecting with people that are looking to you as a possible elected. I always speak about being the first in my family to go to college, and doing that with little to no guidance from my family. So education, I know, is the equalizer. It is what our students and our children need in the district to really succeed in life. And I am fully supportive of fully funding our schools, having free CUNY, and that does take money. It does take budget allocation. It takes support and representation. Someone that could be at the table and can say, I've gone through that situation where I've needed that opportunity for education and maybe haven't had it. So my vision really is to be inclusive, to work with all our schools, to support them and bring back the relief. I think our educators are under a lot of stress, and they're looking, we're pointing at them to re-engage our children after almost a 3-year hiatus. So they need to be fully supported, and we need to fully support the parents that are trying to choose and trying to understand, what is best for their children, and may not have the knowledge firsthand because they probably didn't have those opportunities themselves.
Senator?
I was very proud in 2010 when I went up to Albany. One of the things that we were fighting for a very long time was for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. This was a lawsuit that was brought against the state of New York, claiming, rightly so, that the state of New York was underfunding schools all over the state, but particularly in the city of New York. There was a victory. Unfortunately, the former governor resisted paying that back. And we finally started to get it done last year. So I was very proud that last year and this year we actually sent historic amounts of funding to the city, which is why I'm particularly perplexed by the actions of the mayor and the council. It seems to me kind of a boneheaded move to cut school funding when we've actually given them historic amounts of it. Now, it is true that there's probably less students in class, but guess what? That does not take away some of the capital needs that schools have, some of the professional and staffing needs that schools have, some of the service needs that schools have. So the idea that we would give them historic amounts of funding as we did the last 2 years, and then that Mayor Adams would choose to cut this funding is complete. I don't understand it.
Let's just follow up with education. I really want to talk about our kids who have been sitting in front of computers for 2 years and not getting experiential learning and all kinds of other things. Can the state legislature have a role in reforming curriculums or giving young people opportunities like the interns who are working on our program this evening? I mean, these are the kinds of things that especially the youngest kids really need, because they've been staring at computer screens for a very long time.
I think that is absolutely the role of the legislature. And as a senator, I want to be a face to what's possible. I want to represent to the district, to everyone at home watching. Look at me. Look, I did it. I was able to do it based on hard work, leaning on my family, and really being focused and determined to reach these goals that I've received throughout my career, my life path. So I think it is incumbent on us to be use our platform and really be a voice of inspiration for our children. I think it's absolutely important to be engaged in our district directly, and I love that you have interns. That is key, to have interns, to engage our youth. I think that that's the pathway of having more stable societies and avoiding, a lot of the terrible violent consequences that we're seeing on the street. Our youth feels hope, and they've lost hope when people stop believing in them. And you just take the moment to speak to them directly and share your story and connect with them, you can see the difference from day one, and it takes work.
I will tell you that that is one of the hallmarks of BronxNet Television, and we've been doing this for a very long time and hope to continue to do it. Aside from that, Senator Rivera, your thoughts about school curriculums?
I do think that the state has some influence on that. Matter of fact, just yesterday, I believe, there was a signature, there was a bill I was very proud to vote for, which actually mandated the teaching of the Holocaust in schools all across the state. One of my colleagues, Senator Kaplan from Long Island, sponsored that. I was very proud to vote for it. And there are certainly some things that we can do at the state level. But again, just since we know that there's local control of schools in most instances, and in the case of New York, there's mayoral control, I just again come back to the fact that we have so many needs in New York City schools, even though we have slightly less students, and the mayor actually cut the budget. I do not get it. I do not understand it. And I'll just go back and get them secure more historic funding. Hopefully they'll use it accordingly.
Senator, let's talk about something that I frankly can't believe I still need to ask this question after all these years. I probably asked you this over the years.
Yes, sir.
What would you like to see in the Kingsbridge Armory?
So the Kingsbridge...
I'm laughing. It's not funny.
No,
it's really disturbing, to be honest.
So as you know, the Kingsbridge Armory, not only very close to where we are right now, but I can see it from my window. One of those things. It is the project that was potentially happening for many years, and I've been in your show before. The reason I was supportive of it was not because I was an ice skater. The joke I make is that I'm Puerto Rican. For me, ice is something you put in a rum drink. I don't know anything about ice skating. But I was supportive of it because the developer, to his credit, sat down with the community and drew up a legally binding community benefits agreement that would have gone into effect were the Armory to pass hands and the lease to the developer. Unfortunately, as we now know, the developer was kind of a snake oil salesman, and even though in good faith he sat and did that CBA, he could not secure the funding for this big project. So I am working along with the community right now to make sure that there's an inclusive process here. I should remind you that I was able to secure $130 million for a loan for this facility, for economic development in this facility. And there's about $108 million of it left that will remain in the budget to make sure that it goes to economic development in the Armory, as long as it has the community at the center, and I will continue working with them to make sure that's the case.
Do you have an idea? I mean, this is just a huge facility. The idea of the ice rink, it was interesting. Many people thought it would be somewhat life-changing for the borough of the Bronx. But do you look at that facility and say, wow, what opportunities are there? I'd like to see this.
I certainly see it as a community asset, and I think that it's what I would want to do is, as I've done for the last 11 years, work along with the community to make sure that it is a process that is driven by them. We certainly at the state level and at the city level can and are involved because it's a city property, and there's, as I said earlier, state funding available to actually fund economic development opportunities there. But ultimately, it has to be the community at its center, and I hope to continue working with them as we envision what's going to happen there.
Ms. Camillo?
I think it's wonderful to, reimagine the Armory and think of how we can revitalize the economy and the community by, putting in those resources. And I think of a community center because that is lacking in the district, and related again to the youth, which is so important, and just engaging our families and making them feel like they have a place that is their own. Economic development is key to my platform as well, because I'm a daughter of a small business owner, and our small businesses, we have to encourage entrepreneurship, and we have to really support them in a way that they can remain in New York. I hate to think that people are leaving the city or leaving New York because it's no longer possible here, and seeing the empty storefronts that we have throughout the district. The Armory can be a key hub that really attracts that development again and brings back to the community, meeting a couple of goals at the same time: economic development and also re-engaging our youth and providing them a space to have.
Thank you.
You mentioned small businesses. Let's talk about small businesses. This has been, to say the least, a challenging time for small businesses in every community. Many have closed. Some are still struggling with all kinds of different issues, trying to redevelop their customer base. So number one, how are small businesses doing in your estimation? And then number two, of course, if you are elected to the state senate, how do we improve our small businesses and local business districts?
Well, throughout the district and similarly throughout the city, we've seen small businesses close, throughout the pandemic. About 40% is my estimation, and from what I've read, as far as the rate of businesses that have closed. But what happened also during the pandemic is many people, there's so much unused talent that we have. We saw people do pop-up stores. We saw people transferring their businesses fully online. The conception of a business and of going to work in a physical place, that has all changed. So there's so much that we can do and be creative, but I know firsthand that those small businesses that struggled and are still struggling, there's such a lack of resources. There is a lack of understanding of what's out there. And I know it's cultural divides, language divides, and we need to find a way that if we do have the support, how are we actually bridging that gap? How are we getting them that information firsthand? Because our small businesses, are usually family operated and are trying to just make it day by day. So we need to find a way to better support them.
And what way would that be? I mean, is it a matter of coming up with new grants or new funding programs? What do we do?
It really starts with financial literacy, I would say. At the most basic level, we saw a lot of our businesses not be able to apply for financial assistance because they didn't have their corporations in place. They didn't have their books in order. They already were indebted before having to apply for this assistance. And that really comes from a lack of understanding. You open up a business and there's so many things administratively that you have to take care of. And we have to find a better way to get that information to them.
Senator?
So certainly small businesses are the lifeblood of the economy. It is said often. I see it every day in my district, whether it's the businesses on Burnside Avenue or Kingsbridge Road. The new businesses I'm getting to know up in Riverdale. Fordham Road certainly is kind of the centerpiece of it. And we certainly try to do as much as we can in my office. Matter of fact, based on conversations that we've had with small businesses in my district, particularly as a result of the pandemic and the abuse that some of them saw from their landlords, we created a bill which would create basically a series of protections much like exist for residential tenants. So it would create a series of standards where a landlord, because this, for example, a situation which happened to a business owner who was telling us about it, where there was kind of a challenging spot, but he put a store there. He was successful for a while, and then because he was more successful than prior businesses, the landlord came to him and said, "Hey, you obviously can afford it, so how about I extend the lease and then you have to pay me twice as much." And we're like, that shouldn't happen. So it will create a series of standards whereby it will be similar protections to the ones that exist for residential tenants. For commercial tenants, I think it's essential to do.
We have time for one more question. In some ways, I feel like it's the elephant in the room. Let's talk about local politics and the support for each of you in this campaign. Much has been written about it. I guess you're up next, Senator Rivera. So if you are elected because of redistricting, as we would understand, you would have to move.
Yes, sir, I would.
To another place so that you live in the district. But what about the whole idea that you are an incumbent and were not supported by the Democratic Party? It sounds to me like not because of a coincidence that they had supported Ms. Camillo in a previous redistricting, and so they said, well, I guess we'll support her again. How do you view that? Is that important to you? And then Ms. Camillo will talk about the support that you've received. We'll give you each a chance, and then we'll do concluding comments.
So as you pointed out, this redistricting process, which is a mess that nobody wanted, I wound up 2 blocks outside of my district. So the district I've represented for over a decade, I am 2 blocks out. Now, most of the neighborhoods, as I said earlier, most of the neighborhoods that I've represented for that time are still in my district. And ultimately, when I made the decision to run in that seat, it was because of the neighborhoods that I've already been representing and want to continue to represent. As far as the support that I most seek are the folks who I represent. Back in 2010, I remember having a conversation with constituents when I was introducing myself, and I told them the main difference between that guy and myself is that he's forgotten who he works for.
Almost out of time, so wrap it up.
Yep, I never will. I have not forgotten in 11 years, and ultimately I work for my constituents, and the new 33rd, that's who they will be.
Ms.
Yes,
Camillo?
Gary, thank you for that question. It definitely has always been the focus, unfortunately, of this race because I mentioned it
But we
beginning.
asked it last because I
Yes.
didn't think it was. We want to talk
But it
about
was
other
asked,
things.
yes, and I understand. And I always have to come back to the scenario, right, of running for an open seat back in February 2022 when our Senator Alessandra Biaggi vacates her seat. And the party really corralling around me and saying, a woman of color, we have no female representation in the Senate from the Bronx. You are an attorney. I am an attorney for 10 years. I stand on my own merits, my work in the community. I am a candidate that we were excited about and we are excited about. And that's really where the support comes from. And we have spoken about this topic in other forums. It was never the intention, right, to go against Senator Rivera. And he said it. He had a choice. He made a choice to run in the 33rd.
We're at the time for concluding comments. Thank you both for your participation this evening. By prior agreement, Ms. Camillo, you get the first chance at that.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Gary, and Senator Rivera for joining this conversation, and to everyone watching at home. I am Miguelina Camillo. I am a candidate for State Senate in District 33, and I am running for Senate after having been an attorney, active in my community, and really I believe that I can bring to the district, you know, just a change that is needed. When you go vote, I want you to think about everything we've been through in the last 2.5 years of this pandemic and everything you've overcome. And think about who is that best voice for you up in Albany, who is going to help you overcome these struggles and achieve everything that we want with more housing, more schools that are funded, and just better opportunities for all of us. So I ask you to vote for
Thank
me,
you.
Miguelina Camillo.
Senator Rivera, you get the final word.
Quoting JC, allow me to reintroduce myself. Gustavo Rivera, originally from Puerto Rico, came to New York in '98 to the Bronx in 2000. He's a labor organizer, college professor, got elected in 2010, defeating someone who, Pedro Espada, who then served 6 years in federal prison for stealing public money after I defeated him. Been in the Senate for 11 years, chair of the Health Committee in the Senate, which we achieved after the majority. We defeated the IDC, I became part of the majority, and I became the chair of the Health Committee in the Senate. In those 11 years, I have had the pleasure and the honor of representing my constituents in the Bronx. And whether it's my legislative achievements or my community affairs, the folks that we've served over the years, thousands of people
Thank
keeping
you.
them in their homes.
Well, go ahead. We're almost
Yeah, I was
done.
going to, two more sentences. I'll just
Please
say,
do.
I've been working for you. I want to continue to do so. Thank you for your support so far. I want to continue to work for you.
All right,
Seeking your
time is
support.
always a consideration. Senator Gustavo Rivera and Miguelina Camillo, thank you so
Gary.
much. And folks, that's it. We will see you next time. You may not agree on everything, candidates. I know you'll agree with me that everybody should get out to vote on August 23rd. For more information, visit vote.nyc. And we want to thank our partners, the League of Women Voters of New York City. For more information, call the League at 212-725-3541. We thank our co-sponsors, and we say good night.